Welcome to the RSG Insider podcast. Today we'll be talking about keeping it compliant, what affordable housing monitoring really looks like, where we explore the real work behind community development. I'm Jennifer Hernandez, one of the analysts and home compliance specialists here at RSG. And in today's quick episode, we'll be talking about affordable housing compliance monitoring, what it is, why it matters, and how it works in practice. I'm joined by two of our amazing RSG team members, Rosa Romero, Senior Associate, who has been a consultant with RSG for over 15 years and has specialized in affordable housing compliance monitoring, as well as Joe Avila, our Senior Compliance Monitoring Specialist, who has over 12 years of experience in affordable housing and property management. They each work hands-on in helping ensure compliance across different projects. All right, let's start with the basics. Rosa, in your own words, what does compliance monitoring mean in the context of affordable housing?
Thanks for having me, Jennifer. So affordable housing projects, the owners usually have a regulatory agreement. And what happens is that they need to abide by certain rules and regulations pursuant to the funding source of the development. And so what happens is that they need to get monitored for like the tenant eligibility or affordable rent, like just to ensure that they're complying with what the regulations are saying. But basically, RSG normally gets hired here to assist, like maybe like the cities or counties have this agreement with the developer, and so RSG will help monitor the compliance of that project on behalf of them.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And in your experience, Rosa, who is typically involved in the compliance monitoring?
Well, it's definitely a team effort. With the team effort, I mean, there are different agencies involved. Like it could be like obviously like the developer, the property management. It could be the cities, the counties. And us, RSG as a consultant, we're also involved, and down to the tenant themselves. Like we all work together to ensure that there's compliance throughout the whole process of the project, whatever those agreements are saying with those regulations. So it just goes down to, like I said earlier, like tenant income eligibility or rent compliance, but there's also like fair housing regulations to follow, or like procedures within like, policies that they need to have, like tenant selection policies. So it's definitely like a cooperation from everyone.
Thank you, Rosa. It sounds like it's a really big group effort.
Yes.
And then Joe, from the property manager standpoint, what does the process look like when monitoring tenants and applicants themselves?
Well, the process, in order for us to really understand what we're looking for in applicants, is we need to ensure that we understand the regulatory agreement. The regulatory agreement also will tell us exactly how we need to market the property and what the resident selection criteria should indicate when it comes to the type of eligibility for each of the AMIs, the area minimum income restrictions that are on the property. So it's really important that we follow the affirmative marketing plans, the resident selection criteria, to ensure that we have ongoing compliance for the property.
Yeah, then thank you both for your insights. Now let's break it down a little bit more. There are a few major pieces to compliance work. Rosa, let's start with tenant income eligibility. What's involved in monitoring that?
So basically with the tenant income eligibility, the tenants need to demonstrate that they're below a certain income level, depending on the area median income, and obviously depending on the funding source of the property. And so when they demonstrate this, they provide income documents to support this. And then they also have to, what we call a tenant income certification. They need to certify, based on their income documentation, what income level it is. And then in order for them to be eligible to pay the affordable rent, and also to demonstrate that they're below that level so that they're able to qualify for that affordable rent, because it's restricted. So it's almost like they're getting this benefit, but we need to just verify that, they qualify for this benefit of having a reduced rent.
The current process for most management companies, in my experience, is we need to ensure that we have a completed application. We also have a tenant income questionnaire completed in order for us to determine what the income is that the household is reporting, what assets the household has that they may be reporting, and then verifying income and assets depending on, the assets will be verified depending on the affordable program, the funding sources for the project. If it's, for example, tax credits, tax credit requires that we verify all assets that are combined assets of $49,999. They do require us to do third-party verifications for those. We need to ensure that we also verify employment at move-in to ensure that they are, as a household, qualifying as a whole for the affordable unit.
Thank you, Joe. So it looks like there is a lot of moving parts on making sure a tenant is eligible. When it comes to tenant income documentation, Rosa, could you give some examples of what might be required for home compliance versus TCAC?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things that stand out to me is like how they verify assets. So like home would require to verify all assets, no matter the amount that you have, no matter whatever the tenant has in dollar amounts. And tax credit requires verification if it's over 50,000, right, Joe? 50,000? Yes.
$49,999. So.
Yes. And then from the other item that I remember from home is that I think they require like 3 months paycheck stubs, for example, if they're a wage earner for tenants. But then TCAC does require that, but they also require verification of employment for that as well. So I would say that those are kind of the big ones that stand up to me. And then I think the type of certification timing on both of those funding sources.
Yeah, I know when I first started learning about compliance monitoring, I was told about all these differences. However, that there's still like some sort of overlap. For instance, like both funding resources require that all documentations within 120 days.
Oh,
of
yeah.
the recertification date.
Exactly.
So it's very interesting to like see these differences, but they're still coming together. Now, Joe, with these affordable housing programs, do they always require to have tenant income documentation for the tenant income certification?
So no, a lot of the regulatory agreements are kind of outlined very differently. It's just, in my experience, it's best practice to always include a completed affordable application along with the tenant income questionnaire. It's really going to help build that foundation and build your file for your file to be basically like a story that is going to be completed from start to finish. And you're going to ensure that you always have proper documentation, all of your assets have been verified, and you're proving for any auditor or any agency that you may have to submit these files to that the applicant or the household qualified as a whole for the affordable unit that they are currently residing in.
And I know with my experience with TCAC, I've seen self-certs after 3 years. Can you expand a little bit about that?
So with recertifications, every program is a little bit differently, runs a little differently when it comes to certifications. Tax credit, if the project is 100% 100% tax credit, I'm sorry, then they will allow self-certifications, and home also allows self-certifications. They allow their certifications on the 5th year for them to, on the 6th year, now they have to do a full certification. So it's always making sure that you are really following the most restrictive, because again, a tax credit only allows self-certifications if the project is 100% tax credit. So there's a lot of requirements and a lot of different requirements. We just need to ensure that we are always following the most restrictive.
Joe, and then Rosa, could you walk us through how rent limits and utility allowances factor in with the different funding sources?
Yeah, so each funding source has, they like follow their own income and rent limits that are published either through HUD or tax credit, or even home has it too. And basically, I'll just use tax credit as an example. They have published affordable rents, and those rents are like, they're maximized. What that means is that there's a utility allowance and a tenant paid rent portion built together. And so that equals a maximum affordable rent. And so a property manager, they need to figure out like what their utility allowance would be for their like specific unit, like whatever their bedroom size is. And so they can obtain a chart through like a local housing authority. And so like whatever they have in that unit, whether it be like electric, gas, AC, all that gets like included. It's almost like a discount that they get from the rent. Like the tenants get a discount from that portion because they're paying out of pocket. And so they get that allowance and they use that maximum rent that I'm talking about, and they deduct that amount. So like they deduct $100, for example, and then whatever that is left over, then that would be your tenant paid rent. And so that would be the maximum that the tenant can pay. But of course, together with the utility and the tenant paid rent, would be your gross, your maximum, and you can't exceed that limit. And so a lot of times, like at RSG, we provide those income and rent limit charts just to ensure that we're following like the right calculation on the agreements, because sometimes it's a little bit different. But at the end of the day, like it's still like tied into a funding source. Like what Joe was saying, like we just follow the most restrictive. And so it does help to distribute these charts like annually to our property managers, our owners, like whoever we're assisting with the monitoring.
And then when do these rent limits usually get published?
They normally get published around spring, I would say, like normally April. Like HUD will release first. And then once they release, like the other entities will follow, like HCD, like the state limits and the tax credit. And then home will also do a little bit later, like in June. But I would say like the past 2 years, it's been like about springtime.
And then with all this in mind, compliance monitoring can sound intimidating. Rosa, what's one of the biggest misconceptions people have about what RSG does?
Well, I would say that when RSG comes out and monitors a property, I would say that the biggest term that they kind of get stuck on is like being the word audit. Like we're here to audit, left tenant files, or inspect the units or look at the common areas. And I think that property managers get a little bit intimidated by that. And so we always want to assure them that this is not something like a scary process for them, or like for them to feel like some type of anxiety. We just want to be helpful. And so we just want to make sure that they understand like what we're doing. And sometimes like with our notice, like we try to explain it, like what it is that we're doing. But I think just hopping on a call or just having a conversation through, or even an email, helps kind of break down that so that we all like work together rather than trying to be a little bit nervous about the whole process.
Yeah, I know that as RSG, we try our best in explaining in as much detail on what is needed for on-site compliance monitoring, almost like a checklist to make it just a little bit easier. On the other side, Joe, can you give us the property management perspective of what happens when you receive a compliance monitoring notice?
So whenever, from a property management standpoint, whenever we do receive notice that any auditor from any agency is expecting to come to the property to do any type of audit, it's always best that we ensure that our files are in tip-top shape, that there's no loose papers, that the files are neat, they're organized, the certifications, the current certifications, because typically a notice will tell us exactly what physical year they're coming to monitor for. So we want to make sure that those certifications for that physical year are there and are completed. And if anything that may not be completed, it gets completed quickly so that when the auditor does come, they can come in, review, and get out as quickly as possible. But also we want to make sure that the units themselves and the common areas are inspected. So it's kind of a team effort from all the way from upper management all the way down to the on-site level to ensure that we are as prepared as possible for this inspection.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And Joe, what are some common issues that you've seen on the field with on-site monitoring that could be avoided with more proactive planning?
I think one of the most common issues that I've experienced is it's really just management as a whole, ensuring that they understand the regulatory agreements. Some properties are layered with several different funding sources that it can get a little overwhelming, but just making sure that you have best practices in place where you're understanding the most restrictive and just following the most restrictive. As long as you follow the most restrictive program, you are going to set your property up and your files up for success. So there'll be less tension, less anxiety when the auditor actually gets here, or when you receive that notice that an auditor is coming. So it's just really understanding your property from the beginning.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I know, like you mentioned earlier, that file should read like a story. I think that's great, and it gives like great structure. Now, Rosa, what are some common issues that you've seen on site?
I think one of the common issues I normally see when I was doing it, or even when I do desk monitoring, I see that there's just not access to the regulatory agreement. So like if we're sending a notice out to the property manager, they're just not aware of what those requirements are. And sometimes they just seem to be a little bit too shy to ask, like, hey, can I get a copy of the agreement? But so they just kind of go with the flow. And then like later on, as we're looking at files and we're looking at the timing of certifications, we see like they're not really following the rules of the agreement or the regulations. And so we'll start asking those questions and they're just like, oh, I didn't know. Like, I didn't know what for example, what my area median income is, or what we call set asides. I didn't know what the affordable rent was. I didn't know what the calculation was. So there was just like a lot of unknowns. And so then we kind of step back a little bit and just be like, okay, well, here's the agreement. Here are your set asides. This is what we're monitoring. And I think at RSG, what we've been trying to do lately more is just kind of be more transparent of like, this is what we're doing. Here are the requirements, but I know there's a lot. We don't want to overwhelm them. So we start with like the small basics, like with small questions. Like you remember, Jennifer, sometimes we'll ask them like, hey, what limits are you using? And then we'll ask them like, okay, they'll obviously, well, we can tell from that moment they don't really know. And so then we'll kind of set back and just like, well, you know, according to the agreement, this is what we find and this is what we're monitoring for. And so I feel like once they find out, I get that aha moment, like, oh, okay, I get it. It's not a big deal. We'll just work with that. And then there's also like never a problem correcting something that we find. Like there's always a solution. It doesn't have to escalate to something like, you know, scary where they don't understand, like, what is that going to process? Like, what kind of trouble am I in? Nothing like that. There's always a solution. So I would say that's just the unknown is really the biggest key I see and monitor.
Yeah, I find that it's very helpful to just always go back to the agreement and just make sure you're following those kind of rules. So it does sound that there are some commonalities of certain issues that the property manager side and the auditor side face. Considering the topics that we covered today, Joe, what is your top recommendation for property managers or owners seeking to maintain compliance?
The requirements that are kind of outlined in the regulatory agreement, from the affirmative marketing plans, the marketing resident selection criterias, just making sure that all of that's kind of in place. But another thing that I would also recommend is training. It's imperative that we train the staff as quickly as possible and as accurately as possible to ensure that they are doing their best and that they are ensuring that the property stays in compliance. So I think those will be my biggest recommendation from a property management standpoint.
Yeah. I know we had there for the TQ.
Yeah, I didn't
tease
him right now.
Yeah.
Because I touched on it already.
I know, that sounds like,
I didn't want to go back
did
to
you
it.
want to? We can do that. Or is that fine?
No, we can do that too.
Okay, I can restart then. Okay.
I'll do it again.
All right. So it sounds that there are some commonalities of certain issues that the property manager side and the auditor side face. Considering the topics we have covered today, Joe, what is your top recommendation for property managers or owners seeking to maintain compliance?
I think my top recommendation for property management and ownership would be to ensure that they understand the regulatory agreements. Building that foundation from the get-go is going to be crucial. But also, once they've established a foundation with the most restrictions, it's really ensuring that they have a file process that they're going to follow and they're going to be consistently following throughout the process. And in that process, the application is very important that it's there. And then the tenant's income questionnaire. The questionnaire is going to go a long way. It's going to really help identify different incomes and assets. So ensuring that you kind of put that into place from the very beginning is really going to help document your files that much better. And it's going to ensure that there's ongoing compliance as well.
Yeah, thank you for those tips. And Rosa, what are some of your recommendations?
I mean, I agree mostly with what Joe is saying. Having a checklist is super helpful. Just trying to read through the regulatory agreement or, you know, understanding what that means, asking lots of questions. Like, just don't be afraid to just get involved in that whole process, I would say. And then just to reach out and get some help if needed. And even if you know it, I'm one of those people that like, let's talk about it, you know, like what is the best process or how can we improve this? And so like, again, at RSG, we help a lot of our property managers. We also do lots of training. We've done a lot of policy and procedure manuals. I know nobody likes to read, but we try to make it just informative so that they can just go in there, take a quick peek. But I think that having, like what Joe said, like a questionnaire of some sort or some type of checklist, it completely is a game changer, and it helps so much because like there's so much documentation you have to remember for different like tenant scenarios. And so you don't have to memorize everything. You just need to know like where do I go from here? Because at the end of the day, we're just trying to have, good standing compliance and just follow the regulations.
Yeah, it sounds like working together really makes a difference since everyone's aiming for the same goal, which is staying compliant. When property managers, owners, and auditors keep the conversation open and support each other, it's a lot easier to understand what needs to get done and make sure nothing like slips through the cracks.
Right.
Thank you, Rosa and Joe, for sharing your insights. Based on what we discussed, it sounds like compliance monitoring is about making sure the commitments made in affordable housing deals are upheld, and that requires good systems, clear documentation, and ongoing partnership. If you found this helpful, share it with your network or reach out to us with any of your questions. We've also linked a resource in the episode description. Now, thanks for joining the RSG Insider, and we'll see you next time.